Sechas Yevamos Daf contains three sugyas. The first is what happens when chalitza is performed, when one brother does chalitza to one of many wives. What is the halacha of the other brothers, and what is the halacha of the other wives? Are they forbidden to each other with alav, or are they forbidden to each other with kares? The next question will be, what is the halacha of itzaras sota? If a woman is a sota and then she falls to yibum, are her tsaros, her co-wives, permitted to do yibum or chalitza? Are they obligated to do yibum or chalitza? And the third question is, when you have a machzor gushaso, a man who remarried his wife after she married somebody else, which is forbidden, does she fall to yibum? Does her tzara fall to yibum or not after he dies? Okay, so the first question is, let's begin. We have the case of a woman who falls to yibum. She had a co-wife, and there were a number of brothers. So there are a few different brothers who could do yibum or chalitza. Now the mitzvah of yibum and chalitza falls on all of them. Now one brother gets up and he does chalitza with one of the wives. Now we know, and everybody agrees to this, that there is no longer an iser eishes ach, which would be kares, between this man who did chalitza, between the choletz, and the chalutza, the woman who did chalitza together with him. They are taken down, even though they are now a situation in which it's a former brother's wife, and there's no mitzvah of yibum. You would think there's kares, but the Torah specifically reduces it from kares when it says asher lo yivne es beis achiv, and it's forbidden for him to do binyan beis achiv. He's not allowed to marry her now. Once he did chalitza, he cannot go ahead and do kiddushin. And that would be a lav. It's taken from kares to a lav. Now everybody agrees that applies to that woman and that man. Question is, what about his other brothers? They also don't have a mitzvah of yibum, and they're also they are also the brothers of this woman's former husband. Do they still have kares because it's an eishes ach? Or are they also taken down from kares to a lav by the same pasuk? And the same applies to the other wives, the tsaros. Do they have kares, or are they also reduced to a lav? So Reish Lakish holds that they all are kares. The only one who's reduced to lav is this one who did chalitza and this woman who did chalitza. Those are the only ones. Everybody else stays with kares. Rav Yechanan says no. The one who did chalitza is considered to be a shliach of all the brothers. It's considered as if they all did chalitza, and they are all therefore taken down from an iser kares now to an iser lav. And the same thing applies to the tsaros. The one who did chalitza, the woman who became the chalitza, she was a shliach, she was a messenger of all of them, and therefore they're all busted down from kares to a lav. Now the Gemara has a brisa which has two contradictory implications, so we have to fit this in with both opinions. So the brisa says as follows: the reish of the brisa says that if you have a situation like this, where you have a chalutza, so another wife who falls to yibum again, she requires chalitza from one of the other brothers. That means to say as follows: Reuven was married to a woman, then Reuven died, she fell to yibum to Shimon. Shimon did chalitza. Now Shimon is a choletz, and this woman is a chalutza. Then Shimon married her with kiddushin, so that was a forbidden machzir chalutzaso, and they had a lot for sure. The question is, what is the relationship between this woman and Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun, and all the other brothers? According to Reish Lakish, it should be kares. Going to Rav Yechanan, it should be just a lav. Then Shimon went ahead and died, and she fell to yibum to the other brothers. Does she now have a mitzvah of yibum to them or not? So according to Reish Lakish, she should not. According to Rav Yechanan, she should. According to Rav Yechanan, it's just a lav. According to Reish Lakish, it's kares, and kares always blocks this mitzvah. So the reish of this brisa says that she has to get chalitza from them. That implies that it's not kares, clearly going like Rav Yechanan. However, the end of the brisa says that if one of the brothers gets up and actually marries her, there is no tfisas kedushin. No marriage takes place. The marriage is not chal. That is usually the halacha when you have a kares between two people and they try to marry each other. It blocks the marriage. It doesn't count. That implies like Reish Lakish. So the Gemara's first answer is that this is really going like Rav Yechanan. There's only a lav between them, but it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who holds that there's no tfisas kedushin even when an issue between two people is only a lav. So it's just a lav. That's why if one of them marries her, there's no tfisas kedushin, but she still has to get chalitza because there's only a lav between them, not kares. Now the Gemara has two. This is all in the last half. Now the Gemara has two additional ways of resolving this contradiction between the first case in the brisa and the second case in the brisa, the first half and the second half, the reish and the seifa. One of them fits with Reish Lakish, and one of them fits with Rav Yochanan. So the Gemara says that Rav Ashi held like Reish Lakish, and therefore he answered this brisa in according to Reish Lakish's opinion. That's that they are all kares. And Ravina held like Rav Yochanan, and therefore he made it fit with Rav Yochanan. Now both are going to say that the difference between the cases is this brother, the other brothers, were they born after the death of the first brother, or were they born while the first brother was alive? And that's how it's going to work it out. In one case, the Reisha and the Sefer are talking about different brothers. One is talking about brothers who were alive at the time the first brother was alive, and one is talking about brothers who were born later. So Rav Ashi goes first. He says it fits with Rish Lakish. It's talking about where there is a chiyuv krisus. Therefore, the seifa makes a lot of sense. There is no tfisas kedushin because the other brothers have kares. If one of them gets up and talking about a brother who was alive while the first brother was alive, it's an eshes ach, and therefore they will be in iser as a chalutza. She is a woman who had chalitza. She has an iser of chalutza to the brothers, which Rish Lakish holds as kares, and that's why there's no tfisas kiddushin. Now, how do you understand why chalitza is required in some cases? So he says that's talking about a brother who was born after the kiddushin to Shimon happened. So what happened is as follows: the lady was married to Reuven. He died. She fell him to Shimon. Shimon did chalitza. Then Shimon did kiddushin, and he married her. Then Levi was born. Levi was born then. So he never had a zika to this woman because she was already married to Shimon, and she had already had chalitza from Shimon, and she was already married to Shimon by the time Levi was born. Now, therefore, there is no zika, and there's no problem of kares, because the only way that kares issa that Rish Lakish holds of is created is if she had a yibum zika, she had a connection, she was obligated to do yibum to Levi, but Levi wasn't born yet until afterward. Now, is also no issa of eshes ach shel haya ba'ilamo. That's the fact that she was married to Levi's brother Reuven, and now to Levi's brother Shimon. That doesn't happen. Levi's brother Shimon doesn't count because that's not a marriage at all. Levi's brother Reuven, there's no problem because he was born after that marriage was over. After that Zika was over, she never had any connection to him. And therefore, according to Rab Shimon, as we've seen earlier, there is no Isser of Eshes Ach Shel Haya Ba'ilamo. So that's the case here, and that's why there is no Isser there. So if Shimon then goes and he dies, there's no kares there. There's only an Isser Lav, because she was Haya Ba'ilamo, and therefore if Shimon then, if he then dies, she falls to Yibam to Levi, she requires Chalitza from him, because there's only an Isser Lav between them, there's no Isser kares. Now, that's how it fits with Rish Lakish. How does it fit with Rav Yochanan? So Ravina explains that. So Ravina says that the first case where she requires chalitza is from a brother who's born before that chalitza took place, and this is Rav Yochanan's regular opinion, that there is no iser kares between the woman and the other brothers who didn't do chalitza. There is no iser kares. They are all considered to be chalutzim, and therefore there is no iser kares between them, and there isn't any issue. The sefer where it says that there's no tfisas kedushin, that's talking about where the brother was born after she fell to yibum from the first brother, and the reason why there's an iser is because she's an eshes ach shel haya ba'olamo. The first brother has died before the last brother Levi was born, and we're not going in the opinion of Shimon here, we're going in the opinion of the Rabbanon, that even though he was born after a chalitza already happened, or even if he was born after Kedushin already happened, the Isser Eshes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamo always exists, and therefore in this case there's an Isser kares and no tfisas kedushin based on the fact that it was eshes ach shel haya ba'olamo. Nothing to do with a machzir or chalutza, so nothing to do with any issue like that. Okay, there the Gemara resolves all those issues. Gemara now just says that there's another Shiloh which is very much related to this Machakas of Yechon Rish Lakish, and that's if one of the brothers, he doesn't do Chalitza, but he does Yibum. So what is the halachic status of all the other brothers to all the other tzaros? So again, the case is as follows. Reuven is married to 2 women. Reuven dies without children. One of those wives goes ahead and does Yibum with Shimon. Now the question is, what is the halacha of the tzara to Levi, the third brother? So, we know that the halacha is that once Yibum is performed, there is no longer any kares. That means to say as follows: the tzara, the second wife of Reuven, she's not allowed to marry Shimon because Shimon is married to the first wife. He did Yibum, and the halacha is you cannot do Yibum to two different tsaros from the same marriage. He isn't allowed to do Yibum twice, and that is in what's called an Isser Aseh. That's because the Torah says Sheyivne Beis Achiv, he should build his brother's house, but it only says once. You should only build one house, and that implies you should not build two houses, and you should only marry one Yevama, not two. So therefore he has what's called an Isser Aseh, which is halachically considered to be a Los Aseh, which is a lav, and therefore is just a lav to the other woman, to the tzara. Now that applies to the man who did Yibum himself. Now again, any situation where you have an Eshesach relationship and no Yibum, you would think that it turns into Kares. But this Limud reduces it from Kares to an Isser Aseh, which is called a Lav, which is called a Los Aseh. Question is, what is the relationship between that Tzara and another brother? Do you say that the other brother is a Shliach, that the one who did Yibum is a Shliach of the other brothers? That's what Rabbi Yochanan would say. He would say that it's a Shliach of the other brothers, and therefore they also are reduced from Kares to a regular Lav. Now, Reish Lakish would say otherwise. Reish Lakish would say no, they stay with Kares, they're not reduced, there is no Shlichus, and therefore the Isser Kares still exists. The Gemara says that's a Machlokas Rav Acha and Ravina. We don't know which one says which, but one goes like Rav Yochanan and one goes like Reish Lakish. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to a new discussion, and that is what is the halacha of a Tzaras Sota. Now, that case is as follows. Reuven is married to a woman. She becomes a sota. Sota means that she was suspected of being intimate with another man, and he warned her not to be isolated with her. And then she went ahead and she was isolated with him. We don't know for sure that anything happened there, but it's considered to be a vadai sota. That's considered to be a woman who was mizana, and she is now forbidden both to her own husband and to the woman and to the man that she was forbidden to, that she was warned against, and she was together with. Therefore, they're now involved in a forbidden relationship. Now, if actually what has to happen is that her husband has to divorce her. If he doesn't do that, but he dies first, now she falls to Yibum. So just like she was usher to her husband, she's also usher to her husband's brothers. There's no actual mitzvah of Yibum here anymore. Question is, does this pater her tzara? If she had another co-wife, is that woman also pater from having to do Yibum or chalitza in a situation like this? Now, what's the issue? So the Torah says the word tumah. When it discusses this concept, it uses the word tumah. It says v'nistra v'hine tumah. Now the word tumah is also used in regards to the arayos. Al tetamu b'chol eile. It says don't do these tumah. So there's a connection therefore between the sota and all the arayos. Now just like in erva is pater and pater is her tzara from yibum, the question is a sota where the word tumah is also used, does that also pater her tsaros from Yibum? Okay, so the Gemara tries three attempts to resolve this question. The Gemara's first resolution is from a case of a woman whose husband traveled away, he went overseas, and that she received information from qualified sources that he died and he's not coming back. So she went and she married someone else. And then lo and behold, her husband came back. The halacha now is that she's messed over because she was married to another person illegally. Now, a woman who was married to one man and was together with a different man is forbidden both to her, the first man and the second man. So this woman is now forbidden to both men. Now, the halacha is as follows. The Uraisa, she's not forbidden to her original husband because it's not her fault. She was qualified, she was given qualified information that he was not coming back. So therefore, the Uraisa, she's okay. However, the Rabbanan made a rule that she's going to be forbidden to him anyway, the Rabbanan, in order to make sure that she does thorough checking to make sure that he really is dead before she goes and marries somebody else. So, in that case, the Gemara says that there is a machlokes whether or not she's allowed to do yibum. So, let's say that what happens is as follows. The first husband comes back. Now she's forbidden to the first husband and to the second husband, who she's not legally married to. Then the first husband dies, and she falls to yibum to his brother. So, does she have a mitzvah of yibum or not? So the Mishnah over there says that is a machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim. The Chachamim say there is no mitzvah of yibum. She's not even allowed to be married to her husband. She certainly can't be married to her husband's brother. Doesn't pass the mitzvah of yibum along. Rabbi Shimon says no, there is a mitzvah of yibum and a mitzvah of chalitza because Doiraisa, she is married to her first husband. She's permitted to her first husband. It's only the Rabbanon that we made a knas to make sure that she checks well that we made her asa to her first husband. We didn't asa her to the first husband's brother, and therefore the mitzvah of yibum applies. She can do yibum or chalitza. However, everyone agrees that in this case here, she should have the concept of Yibum and Chalitza. The question is, was there a Knas or not? But the fact that she has to do at least Chalitza, everybody agrees to. Now, that should be a clear indication that in the case of a Tzaras Sota, because she's just like a Sota, she was intimate with another man when she was married to her husband, just like a Sota, she should be, it should be the same case as the question that we asked. Now the Gemara said that in that question that we asked, Rav said that she's pater. She takes off the mitzvah of Yibum, both from herself and from her tzara, by being a Sota. So this doesn't fit. Rav said that she's pater. She doesn't have a mitzvah of Yibum or Chalitza, and here in this case she clearly has one. So Rav answers, says it's not a kash on me. This is a case where she's considered to be a Sota only midrabanan. The rest she's mutter. I was talking about when she was a real Sota d'oraisa. That is where I said that she's pater, and pater is her tzara. So Gemara says that's a very solid answer. What was the person who brought the question? What was he even thinking? He was thinking that when the Rabbanan made a tikkana, they usually model it after the deraisa and keep the same halachos as the deraisa. Therefore, the fact that the Rabbanan there is a mitzvah of Yibum would seem to indicate that on the deraisa level there is also a mitzvah of Yibum. And the answer is no. The Rabbanan made a mitzvah of Yibum and Chalitza. The Rabbanan made their knas with a mitzvah of Yibum and Chalitza, not like the deraisa, which if she would have been a Sota deraisa, she would not have had a mitzvah of Yibum and Chalitza. Alright, that's the Gemara's first proof. Now the Gemara's second proof in the discussion of a Sota, whether or not she paters her tzara from Yibum and Chalitza, goes to another case. And this is a case of a Sota Shenistera. That is a Sota who was warned against being together with another man, and she is secluded with him. And there she stays there for a while with him. So the halacha over there says in the Brisa, she's not allowed to eat truma if he was a kohen. She's considered to forbidden to him. She loses her truma rights. She's also to be together with her husband. She's also to be together with that man. And the Brisa continues, and if he dies, she has to do chalitza and cannot do yibum. So this seems to say, again, it says clearly that she has to do chalitza. So how does that fit with Rav, who said that she doesn't have a mitzvah of chalitza? So the Gemara answers, the Gemara says, this is talking about tumas safek. I was talking about where we know she did, there's no for sure. We have witnesses that testified that she was mizaneh, she was definitely intimate with him. Here we just know that she was secluded with him, and therefore that doesn't count, that's not what I was talking about. Okay, so now the Gemara has a question though. The Gemara says, you're telling me that this is different. Your case was where she was for sure mizana. But the only reason that you said that in the case where she was for sure mizana was because of the word tumah that's used in the case of a woman who is mizana. It's called tumah, and therefore it's linked to arayis. Well, guess what? In this case of the sota who it was secluded, it also says the word tumah, and therefore we should learn from that word tumah that she's considered to be just like arayis, and therefore she should also be pater and pater her tzara. So in order to work this sugya out, the Gemara says we're going to have to go into a machlokes between Rav Yossi ben Kippur and the Chachamim. What is the usage of the word tumah with regard to the sota who was secluded with another man? And the truth is as follows. It does not say the word tumah in the description of a sota. It says the word tumah in a different case altogether, and that's the case of a machzir grushaso. It's somebody who was married to a woman and divorced her. She went and married somebody else, got divorced from him, or he died. So the halacha is she's forbidden to go back to her original husband. The fact that she had a marriage to another husband in between means she's not allowed to go back to her first husband. Now, if she was married to the second husband in a full marriage with kedushin and chuppah, and therefore she was assumed to have been intimate with him because she was married to him fully, then she's definitely forbidden to go back to her first husband. The question is, what if she was just engaged? What if she just had kedushin to her second husband, but she was never actually married to him, and therefore there was no actual physical intimacy between them? Is there an issue to go back to the first husband in that case or not? That's a machlokes between Rav Yossi ben Kippur and the Chachamim. Rav Yossi ben Kippur says no, there is no isser in that case, and the reason is because when the Torah describes machzir grushaso, it uses the word tumah. It says acharei asher hu tamah. She became tameh by being together with someone else. Tumah implies physical relationship. And if she was only in arusa, she did not have nisuin. She didn't have a chuppah. She only had arusa, which is kedushin. She was never physically intimate with a second husband, and therefore the isser does not apply. Now, the Chachamim disagree. And the Chachamim source is from something else. It's because it says that in the discussion of a machzir grushaso, it says v'hoisa lish acher. V'hoisa implies that there was a Kiddushin, all that is needed is Kiddushin to count as V'hoisa, and therefore the Chachamim learn from there that even if she just had Kiddushin with a second man, she's forbidden with the first man. The question that they're stuck with, though, is Rav Yossi's argument. It did say, Acharei asher hu tamah. It used the word Tumah there. So what's that doing there, according to the Chachamim, hold that she didn't have to be physically intimate with the second man in order to be Aser to go back to her first husband. So Gemara says that the Chachamim say that word Tumah there does not apply to a Machzor Gusha, so it's out of context. It's meant to apply to a Sota. It's meant to apply to a Sota and call the Sota Tumah, and that is the Sota that was only secluded. There was not a Vadai Znos, she was only secluded. And she's called a Tumah, and therefore we see from here that the word Tumah applies to a suffix Sota as well, and that's our kasha on Rav. According to Rav, that the word Tumah links to Erva, and therefore creates a breakage of the mitzvah of Chalitza, both on the Sota and on her Tzara, and should apply just as much to a Vadai Znos lady as a suffix Znos lady who was just a Sota who was secluded. So that is our kasha. So the Gemara's answer is that Tumah over here, when this Brisa says that the word Tumah applies to the Sota, it's not talking about a Sota who was only secluded, it's talking about a Sota who was Vadai Nivala, a Sota who was definitely Mizanet. Now, even though the language of the Brisa is just Sota, Shenistra was secluded, because the Brisa wanted to use a clean, refined language, and therefore use the euphemism of seclusion, but it's really referring to a woman who was a Vadai Sota who was Mizanet for sure. And therefore, there is no word Tumah that ever applies to a suffix Sota, and therefore we do not have any reason to say that she paters Yibam and Chalitza from herself and from her Tzara. So the first question, though, is, but if you're talking about a woman who was Vadai Nivala, she was for sure Mizaneh, then why do we need this whole to apply the word Tumah from talking about Machzor Gusha to her? In that case, it says Tumah straight out. It says it says it straight out, clearly. So the Gemara says, yeah, it says it straight out, but that doesn't create a lav on the husband. That just creates a status of Tumah there, but to add an actual lav, that he gets malchus, an actual onish, that is not created by that. That we need a second time, which should say Tumah, and that's what that is for, and therefore that's what we learn from that pasuk there specifically. Okay, we now move on to our third sugya, but this is very much going to be related to the Machlokas Chachamim and Rav Yossi ben Kefar. The third sugya is what happens when a Machzor Gusha falls to Yibam. So we have two ways of asking this. What is her halacha and what is the halacha of her tzara? Now again, let's lay out the case. So Ruvain's married to a woman. Ruvain divorces her. She goes and marries somebody else. He dies or divorces her, and she comes back and marries Reuven again. Now she's married to Reuven in a forbidden marriage. It's a lav. He's not supposed to marry her, but he did. There is Tfisas Kedushin. Then Reuven goes and he dies, and now she falls to Yibam to Shimon. And now, is she responsible to the mitzvah of Yibam? Does she have a mitzvah of Yibam to Shimon? Question number one. Question number two is, does her tzara have a mitzvah of Yibam to Shimon? So the Gemara later spells out that we're not going to ask the question in the case of the of she herself. We only ask the question in the case of the tzara. The Gemara has two versions of whether we ask it there or not. But we'll begin with the tzara, and then we'll get to the Gemara that says where we had the issue or not. So the Gemara says, my question is about the tzara. Now, what's the question based on? The question is based on the fact that the word Tumah is written in Machzor Gusha. As we've been discussing in the past, what Rav Yossi and the Chachamim do with the word Tumah, where it says by Machzor Gusha. Does that word Tumah link to the Eravos, to the Arayos, and just like they pater the mitzvah of Yibam from the Tzara, she also, the Machzor Gusha, also paters the mitzvah of Yibam from the Tzara. Now there's two versions of the question. In one version, the first version, the question is only in the Rabbanon. In the second version, the question is only in Rav Yossi ben Kefar. How so? So the Gemara says as follows. We said that Rav Yossi keeps the word Tumah in context of the Machzor Gusha, and the Rabbanon take it out of context in Machzor Gusha and move it to the case of the Sota. So in the first version, we say, according to Rav Yossi, there's no Shaila. The word Tumah definitely applies there, and it definitely therefore paters her and her tzara from any mitzvah of Yibam based on the word Tumah which is there, and it's not taken out of context at all. Now the Gemara notes that there is a potential limud the other way to exclude the tzara from the p'tor, and that's that the Torah says to'eva he. She is a to'eva. She is a to'eva means she is rejected from her original husband, and that would imply that she herself is Tuma, she herself has the breakage of this relationship, and she herself would not fall to Yibum, but that would limit only her and not her tzara. So Gemara says we wouldn't be bothered by that because we would say it's not to'evahi to exclude her tzara, it's to exclude her children. Her children don't get a status of being mamzerim or psulim of any sort. Her children are fine. There are are excluded from the term to'eva. Our children are not considered to'eva. Our children are not rejected based on this marriage. However, her tzara is just as rejected as she is, and both of them are therefore have tum applied to them and don't have a mitzvah of yibum. So this is the first version that we wouldn't have a question according to Rav Yossi. However, according to the Rabbanan here we would have a question, and that's because the Rabbanan say that the word tuma is meant to be moved out of context of machzor grushaso to the case of the sota that was secluded. And the question is, when we take it out of context, does that mean that it's not here at all and therefore there's no link to Arias? Or do we say, no, that still, even though it's considered to be out of context, but it is written here, and therefore we do consider it to be linked to Arias, and therefore we do have a drasha to say that she patters herself in Nitzara as well. That's Gemara's first version of the question. Now, according to the second version of the question, there is no question according to the Chachamim, because according to the Chachamim we assume that it's Pashut, that the word Tuma is taken out of context, it's not here anymore, and therefore there is no way to link this Machzor Grushaso to Arias, and she doesn't pater herself or her tzara. According to Rav Yossi, there you have a question, because the word Tum is not taken out of context. Now, therefore, the word Tum is certainly there, and the Machzor Grushaso is definitely linked to Arias, and she is definitely pater from the mitzvah of Yibum, and she doesn't require chalitza. The question is, what about her tzara? And that's based on the word to'evahi. How do you understand? To'evahi, she's the only one who's rejected, and therefore doesn't have a mitzvah of Yibum and chalitza, but her tzara does? Or to'evahi, she has no mitzvah, she is rejected, but her children are not, but the tzara is just as rejected as she is, and doesn't have a mitzvah of Yibum at all. So those are the two versions of the question. Now the Gemara is going to go through two potential proofs to try to resolve this question. Now, I'm going to skip ahead to a later version of the question where the Gemara has a discussion as to whether the question should be about the tzara as well. And then we'll get to the two proofs. So that later version is brought by Rav Chia bar Abba named Rav Yochanan. And there's two versions of how Rav Yochanan there asks the question. According to one version, it's like we said it now. The question is about the tzara. It's not about the Machzor Grushaso herself. According to the other version, the question is about her and not the tzara. Either way, the Gemara explains why would I have a question on her, why would I have a question on the tzara. So the Gemara says as follows. There's a kal v'chomer on the Machzor Grushaso herself. That is, she is forbidden to be married to her original husband. She's not allowed to be married to Reuven. She's married to him, but she's not allowed to. So the kal v'chomer would work as follows. If she can't be married to Reuven, she certainly can't be married to Reuven's brother Shimon. The Yibum should certainly not apply at all. However, the tzara was never forbidden to be married to Reuven because the tzara is not a Machzor Grushaso, and therefore the tzara could marry Shimon and have no kal v'chomer on the tzara really. Can I stretch the kal v'chomer to include the tzara or not? So that's the question on the tzara, but there's no question on her because on her there's a kal v'chomer. On the tzara, I'm not sure whether I should include the kal v'chomer or not. According to the other version of the question, the kal v'chomer definitely cannot work for the tzara because there is no kal v'chomer on the tzara. The tzara is not asur to Reuven. The question is, does the kal v'chomer work at all? Is it a good kal v'chomer to tell me that she's forbidden to Reuven, therefore she's forbidden to Shimon and doesn't have Yibum, or is it not a good kal v'chomer and therefore she really does have a mitzvah of Yibum? Okay, so let's get into the two proofs. And the two proofs, the Gemara brings them twice. Once in the first version of the Gemara, and then after bringing Rav Yochanan, the Gemara runs through both proofs again with the same set of answers. So the first proof is from a brisa that says that if two women fall to Yibum, and one's a puzzle, one's a kosher. The brisa doesn't explain what that means, the Gemara will define it. One's a puzzle, one's a kosher. So the Gemara says, so you have Reuven, again, let's flesh out the case. Reuven is married to two women. Reuven dies. They both fall to Yibum to Shimon. One's a puzzle, one's a kosher. Shimon, what should he do? So if Shimon wants to do chalitza, the Brisa says he should do chalitza to the puzzle, not the kosher. If Shimon wants to do Yibum, he should do Yibum to the kosher and not the puzzle. Now, it doesn't clearly say that he has to, but it could mean that he has to or it could mean that he should. Now the Gemara says, what's puzzle and kosher here? What are we talking about? So there are three ways to understand this. Does it possibly mean that he's a Kohen and the puzzle is a former divorcee? She's a psula, or she does a chalutza from before. A grusha or a chalutza is not allowed to marry a Kohen, so she's puzzled to him. And therefore, that's why it says if he wants to do Yibum, he has to do Yibum to the kosher, and if he wants to do chalitza, he can do chalitza to the puzzle. The Gemara says that's pashut. That would be obvious. Why would you need to tell me that? He definitely cannot do Yibum to the puzzle because he's a Kohen, is not allowed to marry, she's puzzled to him. So that's certainly not the issue. The Gemara doesn't even spell this out clearly. Rashi says this is what the Gemara means. Now, another way of understanding it is that they are psulim, but he's a Yisrael, so they're puzzled to everybody else. They're puzzled to Kohanim. The puzzle is puzzled to Kohanim. The kosher is kosher to Kohanim. None of them are psulim to him. He could marry either one he wants. So then the Gemara says, why would that be an issue then? Why does the Brisa say that he should do chalitza to the puzzle and even to the kosher? Who cares? Makes no difference to him. So that can't be it. So the Gemara says it must be talking about a machzir grushaso. And that's where she is puzzled not to anybody else, and not because of kahuna. She's puzzled to him because she's a machzir grushaso. And therefore it's telling me that if he wants to do chalitza, if he wants to do yibum, he has to do the kosher, not the machzir grushaso. He's got to do yibum, not to the machzir grushaso. And if he wants to do chalitza to the puzzle, the machzir grushaso. This would decide both questions, that there is a mitzvah of yibum on the tzara and on the actual machzir grushaso herself, because you see that she requires chalitza. So the Gemara says that this makes sense, even though it should be obvious because she's a psula, but it makes sense because you may have learned from To'evahi to exclude the tzara. We're not going to learn from To'evahi. The Mishnah is exactly telling me the answer to our question. That's why it's a chiddush. You're not going to learn from To'evahi, and there will be an iser on the tzara as well. So the Gemara says, no, this is not what it means. It means that actually it was the second version of what we said by psulim. It means that she's actually a puzzle to her, that she is the actual apostle to others, but not to her. Meaning he's Yisrael, but the psula is apostle to Kohanim. What then is the reason that we say that he has to do chalitza only to her and not to the kosher? Simple. That kosher is not, she's allowed to go marry Kohanim. If he's going to go do chalitza to her, she becomes a chalitza, she becomes aser to Kohanim. Why would he aser her to Kohanim for no reason? Better he should do chalitza to the woman who's a psula already and leave this woman be free to marry Kohanim if she wants to. The Gemara uses an expression for that. If you have water that you don't need, don't pour it out, give it to somebody else who needs it. You don't stand to lose from that. Okay, now the Gemara goes to another proof, and that's from a brisa that says, if you have a machzir grushaso, Mishani says that's from when she was married, she's a real machzir grushaso, she falls to yibum, same case. So the brisa says she and her tzara require chalitza, and not yibum. She requires chalitza. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? She and her tzara require chalitza? You can't do chalitza to both of them. It's one or the other. So the Gemara says, okay. So what it has to mean then is she requires chalitza, and her, meaning she or her tzara require chalitza. Either she or her tzara require chalitza. That's what it has to mean. If that's the case, so then you're clearly saying that she requires chalitza and her tzara require chalitza. You got to do chalitza to one of the two. Again, that solves the question because you see that machzir grushaso and her tzara both do have an obligation of yibum or chalitza. Of course, it's not a problem. Once you're changing the meaning of the Mishnah because it didn't fit, then you may as well change it all the way. And we'll change it as follows: she requires chalitza because she can't do yibum; she's a machzir grushaso. But the tzara, maybe we'll learn it like this: she could have either yibum or chalitza, and therefore we would not have any resolution to our issue because she requires and the chalitza would not.